really happy to be here with you today. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you. Happy.
Let's start talking about the story of Kiss of the Spider Woman. We know that this story is full of nuances, touching on politics, freedom, and also hope. So, could you tell me a bit about the process of adapting the story for this new version on the big screen?
Yes. Well, I think for me, it was really returning to the novel and wanting to be faithful to a novel that I think was way ahead of its time, and specifically the love story aspect of it. Unfortunately, uh, the things that Puig was writing about, the very fact that these two characters are in this cell. One of them is a political prisoner. He's a Marxist revolutionary. It's very clear why he's in that cell. But why is Molina in the cell? It's because he's gay, right? And he was entrapped by the police. And so the demonization of the kind of marginalized characters in society is so much a part of the playbook of an autocracy. And I have to say, reading that as and then starting to write it before our election season had even started, it was clear that trans people were going to be demonized in the next election, and indeed they were. And now that's continued. We've now introduced into the language the idea of trans terrorists, the idea, making people terrified of trans people, as a distraction. That was one of the many reasons that it felt like, boy, this story has incredible potency today. But it's sad. It's 50 years later, right? Um, the playbook doesn't change.
You talk about this election and all this moment in politics. How was like bringing this story to
Oh,
the
yeah, right.
screen in
Yeah.
this contest?
Well, it's interesting because, we shot in Uruguay, standing in for Argentina in the 80s, it's one ferry ride away. Um,
Hmm.
and we were surrounded by people. We had a lot of Argentinians on our crew, and Uruguay had its own political struggles. So it was important to kind of recreate the feeling of a militarized society in that period. I think one of the ironies is Molina finds liberation, freedom through love in the prison cell. And then he gets released, and that's more of a prison than the cell was, because in every shot practically there are tanks and there are military helicopters, and then there are just people walking on the street. Our local art directions, research and things like that. That felt like it was chilling to recreate that. But then it's so strange and unpredictable that now it has a different resonance when you see that movie in a theater now, and you see people stopping people, and the fact that this is happening on our streets is something that we couldn't have predicted.
And talking about this part of the prison and all
Yeah.
that,
Mm.
could you share a bit about what it was like working with Diego and Tonatiuh while filming the prison scenes? Those are some of the most emotional and intense moments in the film.
Oh yeah, it was so great. We shot the Hollywood musical in New York, and then we all went down to Montevideo, right? And we rehearsed it like a play. So it starts with just a room where every morning we take our coffee, and it was Diego, Tonatiuh, and I, and we would just start to go through the scenes from page one, and talking through everything. And Diego especially, as a director himself, and as a brilliant man on every level, probing every moment, every line, and I was taking there some wonderful lines that are in the movie that Diego invented, and some from Tonatiuh too. So this incredibly organic process that then moved onto, we'd visit the real prison, and then we came onto our prison set, which was a duplicate of the real prison, and we started to rehearse on the set. We had this great luxury, and work out the way it would be shot, and then we started shooting, and It was, sort of like arriving early, leaving often in the dark. It's tiny, dark set on a tiny, dark sound stage. We were all in it together. Um, and you just start to feel like you were living what was happening, and that's what happened between those two actors. The they got to know each other, and then they got to be very close to each other because they were depending on each other every day to come through in the scene.
And they have a real chemistry on screen as well. The scenes are amazing. And talking about your vision and the practical part of the musical,
Yeah.
everything looks so beautiful, the sets, the choreography. So I love to know how you orchestrate those numbers and what it was like working with the cast on that aspect.
Right. Well, I've made a few musicals before, and the great thing about it is it's all about the planning. It's all about the rehearsal. It's all about, in this case, it started with working with the choreographers and looking at those classic numbers and seeing how are we going to adapt that to the music that we have and the story that we have, and that takes a long time, and then you bring Tobias, the cameraman, in, and then when you built something, you show it to Jennifer, and then she makes great adjustments. I think
She's a pro.
she's a pro. I think she was a judge on a choreography show, So I mean, this is something that she just knows in her bones. She also knows what she can do, and her thing was like, push me beyond where you think I can go. I want it to be hard. I want to challenge myself, which is what those dancers did in the 50s, And then you're there in New York with the greatest group of dancers in the theater right now, and specifically a Latin group of dancers. I always think of Chicago and say Chicago was a snapshot of the best dancers in 2002, and this is a snapshot of the best dancers, but also the best Latino dancers that we have in New York. And this is a time, with Buena Vista Social Club, a lot of other things, where that's a real movement here. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of, that this will exist forever as a record of that and for those dancers.
And how was like to find the perfect scene for the end? How was the process of creating that final scene?
That had existed on stage, but it was very different. Again, we were telling something, we were telling a love story on stage. He dances a tango with the Spider Woman, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's called His Name is Molina. But you know, in the movie, this is the final fantasy he has as he's about to die, right? Molina has always wanted to be a woman, so why in his final fantasy wouldn't he be a woman dying in the arms of the man he loves? So that's how he sees himself. So it's radically different from that. And we even changed one lyric. It's now her name was Melina, just as her name was Aurora, He really does become um, the character that he's most loved in movies and the one he's most connected to. It was a thrill, and just to be able to create that classic MGM staircase, that was the idea. He's gonna walk up those steps and to his death, but it's going to be glorious. It's a glorious act of sacrifice. And once we had that idea, then it was just thrilling to, create it musically. And I gotta say, neither Diego had been in Havana Nights, but neither Diego nor Tony Tiu are trained dancers, and they do a very intricate tango there, And again, that's part of the bonding between the two of them because they had to depend on each other to really make that work. And it was, they were a little terrified and they rehearse, and then they did it. They did it all and one. They could have done it on a stage. It was fantastic to watch.
It was an amazing scene. I really enjoyed that.
That's great.
And let me ask one more question. Hector Babenco's film was very important at the
Yeah.
time and made a
Very.
huge impact. So, did that version influence your work or vision for this adaptation in any way?
That version influenced my life, it as a young gay man to see, our biggest, movie star play that hairdresser and to tell that story so powerfully. It was just, it was at a time when those movies didn't come along that frequently. So it was just great to see gay representation. Um, so that it influenced my life. It didn't influence this movie. I really did put that aside. It's Bebenko's version, as you know, set in Brazil, and he was bringing so much of himself to the movie in his interpretation. And this, I really wanted my own, let's face it, queer version of it. I think that's a very different film in that way. So I didn't use it as a reference point, frankly.
And it's so nice to hear you say this movie impacted your life. It's a powerful story, and for the time it was like so
Really,
intense and so important.
absolutely, yes, and lives forever.
And and tell me about what do you hope audience will take away from this experience in case of the Spider-Woman?
I think it's that in these difficult times where there are these walls that have gone up between, different points of view, political points of view. If these two characters, one of the things I love that Puig invented was that the gay character is kind of right wing, or he's apolitical, but he has very primitive political thoughts, which is funny, I think, but they move toward each other, right? He understands the value of political engagement, and Valentine starts to understand the value of art and escape and telling a story through metaphor, So I think those characters, if they can move toward each other, I hope the feeling you just get is, well, maybe we can do that in real life too, because we're going to have to. We have no choice, Otherwise, we're just going to be at loggerheads forever, and that can't sustain.
Bill, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
Thank
for
you.
this opportunity. Thank you for talking to me and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye bye.